Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we are studying Yirmiyahu, that's Jeremiah chapter 9. We are going to study from verse 3 through 23 of chapter 9. The first two verses in chapter 9 really belonged at the end of chapter 8, so we completed them yesterday when we read chapter 8. And the last two verses of chapter 9, that's 24 and 25, really belong as the beginning of chapter 10, so I'm going to leave them for the next podcast. So today we are going to go from verse 3 through verse 23. We are continuing now to read what is the portion of the prophets that is read in synagogue on the day of Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, which is a day dedicated to mourning the catastrophe that occurred when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. And that is the very catastrophe that Yirmiyahu, that Jeremiah the prophet is prophesying about right now, and is predicting, so to speak, about the calamities that are about to come. It is very dramatic. It is very searing in its critique of the people, and the words are quite stirring and quite awful, to tell the truth, to read, and difficult. But this is Yirmiyahu seeing the destruction of his people, and is therefore his appropriate emotions that we're reading about. In this half of the portion that we're going to read today, he shifts more towards telling the people what's wrong and discussing the corruption that's leading to the calamity. He does talk about the suffering and the crying like he did in the first half, but there's a more heavy and more intense focus on the corruption of the people and what led to this disaster. So let's begin with verse 3. Ish mere'eu hishameru. Each man must watch out for his friend. What Yirmiyahu is about to describe is corruption and an environment of such selfishness that one can no longer look or talk to his neighbors or his friends or his family and feel like he can confide in anyone, he can trust in anyone, look to anyone for help, but rather you're constantly on guard because everyone is constantly trying to take advantage of everyone else. It kind of reminds me of the trust but verify, which sounds which was attributed to President Reagan. An environment where you really can't trust anyone. Ish mere'eu hishameru. Every man must watch out for his friend. V'al kol ach al tivtachu. And you cannot even have trust or faith in your own brother. Ki chol ach akov Yaakov, because every brother acts in a way of deceit. Every brother acts in a way that they're trying to make their fellow stumble and take advantage of them. And every friend is going around telling stories behind the other person's back, making up slander and stories and telling things about each other. This environment, unfortunately, sounds eerily familiar to those of us that are living through our times today. The ish birei yihaselu, verse 4. Every person cheats and tricks his friends and defrauds them. The emes lo yidaber. They never speak the truth. Everything they say is said in a way to take advantage of others. Limdu lishonam daber sheker. They have taught their tongues to speak in such a way that they're constantly speaking falsehood. Ha'avei nilu. They are so steeped in their perversions that they're exhausted. They're worn out from their perversions and their corruption. Shivtecha b'soch mirma. This is verse 5. You live within an environment that is completely false, that is completely full of deceit. B'mirma, and it is because of this deceit that me'anu das osi, that the people have refused to know me and to learn about me. No'om Adonai, says God. The God is everything that stands against this type of environment. God stands for truth. God stands for justice. God stands for righteousness. God stands for kindness and empathy. And And this kind of environment is exactly the opposite. One cannot possibly know God when one lives in this kind of world. Lachain, therefore, verse 6, so says God, I am going to smelt them and I am going to test them out or assay them. If you remember back in chapter 6, verse 29, we had the verse there where God talked about the people of saying that they were like a metal that no matter how much I try to purify them and smelt them, I can't get them pure. I can't get rid of. They just won't. There's so much junk in it that I can't make it pure. Again, Yirmiyahu, the prophet here, is again drawing on the same image, and that is the image of God. Treating the people like one smelts, because if you think about it, the image is pretty powerful because there's a strong flame, a flame of destruction, but through that destruction one purifies the metal. God said, I'm going to purify it of chantim, and then I will check the metal to make sure it's pure by getting rid of all of the bad stuff. What choice do I have? What else can I do, says God, with my beautiful people? This phrase basami is constantly used during this lamentation. We saw this in the last podcast and in this one. It's almost like God is referring to his nation in a way that demonstrates how much he cherishes them and how much he loves them. And so sometimes it's the prophet, it sounds like the prophet speaking about my beautiful nation, my wonderful nation. At the same time that God and the prophet, depending on who's speaking in which verse, are mourning their destruction and lamenting the evil and corruption that has overtaken their people. Chetz shachut l'shonam, verse 7. Their tongues are like sharpened arrows. Mirma diber, all it does is speak falsely. When you speak in deceitful ways in order to take advantage of someone else, it's like your tongue is shooting weapons to hurt people. Befiv, how is this done? Befiv shalom esrei yidaber, with their mouths they speak in peace. They pretend they're your friend, and they pretend that they're really close, and everything is wonderful, and but really they're covering up their lies with a kirbo yasim arbo. But in is deep inside, what he's really doing is laying a trap. He's laying a trap for you in order to take advantage. Should I not punish these people for such deeds? In shall I not take revenge, or shall I not exact retribution against a nation like this? Verse 9, Al heharim esovachi. Now this is interesting because at first it sounds like the prophet speaking, but from the context, this is actually God speaking. And so really this is God saying how he is lamenting this destruction, because God doesn't want this destruction to happen. So to speak, this is God saying, on the mountains I raise my voice in cries, vanehi, and wailing. Beyond the os midbar kina, and on the pastures in the wilderness I am stating lamentations. Why? Kinitzesumi bli'ish over, because they have been destroyed in such a way there's no longer people coming and going through the fields. V'lo shamu kol miknai, no longer hear the sound of sheep and pasture. Me'of hashamayim v'ad behema, even the birds in the sky and the animals in the fields, nodadu halachu, they have all left, they have all gone. Everything is gone, everything is desolate. V'nosati es Yerushalayim legalim ma'on tanim, and I have placed and I have made Yerushalayim. This is how we know that this I here is speaking is God, not the prophet, because the context continues, and I have made Yerushalayim, I have made Jerusalem into piles of rubble, a place where jackals wander through the rubble. V'yasarei Yehuda, and all of the towns of Judah, attain shemama, I am going to lay waste, mibli yoshev, with no longer any inhabitants. The next verse, verse 11, mi ha'ish hechachamim v'yavein esos. This literally translated would sound as follows: Who is the wise man who can understand this? Asher diber pi. However, but from the context, it's more meant to be a statement, and it's just really just a manner of speech, and many of the commentaries understand it this way, and I'm going to read it this way as well. That it, rather than being a question, this is really a statement, meaning any person who is intelligent is a person who will understand this. Every wise man knows this. Asher diber pi Adonai elav, and anyone who has spoken with God, any prophet, anyone who has studied his Torah and learned God's ways, v'yagida, can say and explain what's going on over here. Alma of the Haaretz, on what the reasons why the land is being lost, nitisach midbar mibli over, and has destroyed now like a wilderness with no longer any people. In other words, if you just learn, study, think, any wise person can look at the world and at this land and understand what led to this destruction. Vayomer Adonai, and God says, and God explains it to us again. I'll tell you exactly why. Al azvam et torati, because they have forsaken my Torah. Asher nasati lifneim, the Torah that I have given to them. Now remember, what does this mean? They have forsaken my Torah. God has been extremely specific that when he says they have forsaken my Torah, what he means is that they have been deceitful, they have been dishonest, they have been unjust, they have, and Yirmiyahu said this clearly before, and he's going to say it clearly very soon again, about what it is, what is the Torah that God wants. Asher nasati lifneim v'lo sham'u b'koli v'lo holchu. They never listened to my voice. They didn't go in my ways. They didn't live. Go in my ways means they didn't live the kind of life that I want them to live. When I gave them this Torah, when I gave it to them, this is how I wanted them to live. And what did they do instead? Vayelchu. They went acharei shrirut libam. They went after their own ideas, their own ways, the waywardness of their hearts. And they went to the idols of the Baal, asher limdum avosim, that they were taught by their fathers. They went in those ways. Now, I think I've said this several times in many of the prophets throughout these podcasts, but I'm going to say this again because I think this is one of the most important points to remember when we study the prophets, that deceit, corruption, selfishness, greed, all of these bad qualities and idol worship are almost always mentioned in the same breath. And the reason why this is because what God demands of us is morality. What God demands of us is, as we're going to see very soon, justice, righteousness, concern for the needy, care for the poor, honesty. That's what God wants. That is the Torah that he's asking us to do. So God asks for morality. It's hard for people to do that. People would rather have a life where, in order to get so-called the favor from the gods, that all you need to do is a ritual, a prayer, a service, a sacrifice. What an idol stands for is that type of thinking. Idols don't demand from you that you live a good life. Idols demand from you that you cover them with gold, that you bow down to them, that you burn incense, that you bring sacrifices, or whatever particular rituals are involved with that idol. And when people treated the temple in the same way, as if that's what God wants, God was disgusted with them and destroyed the temple, as we've been seeing in the previous chapters. If you treat the temple this way, then I will also reject you, God says. But what God wants from us is morality. What he wants is justice, etc. That's why the two are always connected. When people go acharei shrirut libam, after the waywardness of their own heart, then they go to idols. Sometimes those idols are found in God's own temple, because people can turn God's own temple into an idol. And sometimes those idols are other idols. Once you start worshiping idols, it could be anywhere. The sun, the moon, the stars, the statue, whatever. Yourself, which we've had many times. People can worship other human beings. People can worship money, power, anything. Anything other than actually sitting down and trying to live a better life and be a better person. Therefore, let's continue in 14. Lachein, therefore, ko amar Adonai tzavos Elahei Yisrael, so says God, because you are living this type of life, God, the God of Israel, I'm going to feed this nation la'ana, which is translated as wormwood, a type of weed that's bitter. Vishkisem merosh, and I am going to give them to drink a poisonous drink. V'hafitzosim b'goyim, and I am going to scatter them among the nations. Asher lo yad'u for some nations that are out there that they, the people and their forefathers, didn't even know these nations existed. They'll be scattered to the four corners of the earth, everywhere. And I'm going to chase them with the sword. I'm going to send the sword, war after them, ad kalosiosam, until I destroy them. Kalosiosam sounds like God is saying that the people will be completely destroyed. However, we know, let's say from verse Jeremiah 5:18, and in many other places, Jeremiah repeated over and over again, and all the prophets repeated, that no matter how bad the destruction is, lo esek kala, I will not, and this is the same word, I will not completely destroy them, I will always leave a remnant. So one way of understanding this is ad kalosiosam means I will destroy them as a people, or I'll destroy most of them, like the Radak explains. I think it's much simpler. Just like we used the language before of God started this by saying, what we studied today by saying, I'm going to smelt them to take out the impurities. I'm going to melt them like metal to remove the impurities. What God is saying ad kalosiosam, until I destroy them, he means the impurities. I'm going to send until they are pure, until the people come back to me, until the impurities are removed. And once they are removed, the people can come back and will come back. But we'll get to that later. So, and then verse 16, Ko amar Adonai Tzvaos, so says God, the Lord of hosts. Hisponenu, think about this. Think about what I'm telling you. Think about this message. And vikirula mekononos utvoena, and call to those women that cry, the women that are sing dirges and sing lamentations and sing sad songs on sad occasions, at funerals and so on. Bring them out, bring all of them out, because there's going to be a lot of dirges to sing. V'alachachamos, and to the intelligent women who compose this music and sing this music. Shilchu, send for them, v'tavona, and have them all come, utamaherna, and hurry, v'tisena aleinu nehi, and begin to start crying over this. Yirmiyahu, remember, is speaking in the time before the destruction of the temple. He's speaking in the time when things are still moving along hunky dory, supposedly. But he's asking that, he's portraying a picture for the people that are listening to him speak, and saying, start to cry, start to lament, start the songs of mourning, because of your behavior. This is what's going to happen. V'tiradna einenu dima, and our eyes should pour with tears. V'afafenu yizlumayim, and our pupils of the eyes will just pour forth with water. Why? Ki kol nehi nishma mitzion, because I hear a sound of wailing, of awful crying, screaming, nishma mitzion, coming from Zion. Ech shudadnu, how is it that we have been plundered? Boshnu ma'od, we are so embarrassed, so ashamed. Ki azavnu aretz, because we have left our land. Ki yeshlichu mishkanosenu, our homes have been thrown to the ground, our homes have been destroyed. Be prepared, be ready to cry, be ready to mourn. Ki shemano noshim dvar Adonai, because the women have heard what God has predicted. There seems to have been probably less corruption among the women here. And Yermiyahu, when he's speaking to the people, the women among the crowd, he seems to be saying they've heard, they understand what God is trying to say. They get the message. And and this is directed at the women that were listening to the prophet speaking. Your ears have taken the words of God seriously, and therefore go home and teach your daughters to cry and wail. Don't teach them to walk around and say, as Yirmiyahu said before, shalom, shalom, everything is peaceful, everything is fine, it's all going to be okay, don't worry, we don't have to change our ways. But teach them to cry, because the people are so corrupt. And let one woman teach her friend her lamentation. Why? Because death has arisen in our windows. It has come into our fortresses. It come through the windows. It's an image many compare it to like plague or a death that sneaks in on you. You can't just go into your house and close the door and you're safe. It'll come through the windows. It'll come even in Armanosenu, even in your fortress. It'll find a way in. It will cut down even the children on the outside in the streets. It'll cut down the young men that are out in the streets. It's going to cut everyone down. Daber, speak, say this. Remember, this is God telling Yirmiyahu, telling the prophet, say this to everyone. Ko Noam Adonai. This is how God speaks. This is what God says. This is what He's predicting. Adam, that the corpses of men will fall kedomen al pnei asoda, like garbage or dung on the fields, and like the bundles fall behind one who harvests. But there's no one to collect it, no one to take the bodies and bury, no one to collect the harvest and bring it in. Now, the last two verses, again, reiterate the bottom line. What's the problem? What's wrong? And the problem, again, is arrogance, is haughtiness. Ko amar Adonai, so says God, al yisalel chacham b'chachmaso. May a wise man should never take pride and glory in his wisdom, because it's nothing. Vayisalel hagibor beguraso. And a powerful man, a strong man, shouldn't take pride and glory in his strength. Al yisalel ashir biashro. And may a wealthy man not take pride and glory in his wealth. These things, wisdom, physical strength, and material wealth, these are nothing. Taking pride in these is arrogance. Rather, ki im bezos yisalel hamisalel. One who wants to take pride and glory in something, I'll tell you the only thing that is worthy. Haskel v'yadoa osi. Get to know me, God. Get to know what I'm about. Ki ani Adonai, because I am God. And what do I do? And what are the things that make me? Oseh chesed, I do kindness. Mishpat, I do justice. Utzedakah, I do righteousness. Baaretz, in the land. And this is what I want from you. Ki ve'elo chafatzti. These are the things that I want from you. Noam Adonai, so says God. Thank you so much for listening to Yirmiyahu chapter 9. This also concludes the portion that is read on the 9th day of Av. And it is some of the very deep, very important lessons to be learned. Looking forward to continuing the study of Jeremiah together.